Loibner-Waitkus.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. I said, Georgia, Georgia, a song of you.
Okay, welcome back. I am Alan Loibner-Waitkus, and this is American Literature 1865 through present. And if you're wondering what the heck I have on, remember it's political season, and I just got back from an event, and yes, I'm in a Hillary Clinton pantsuit t-shirt. So anyway, I've never let professionalism gotten in the way of anything I've done before. So, why change? Anyway, a couple of things. Number one, I'm sure some of you are celebrating. We and I am sighing a little bit of a breath of relief. We managed to go 2 stories this week with no use of the N-word. So that's good because I haven't had to deal with the complaint. Well, I didn't really have complaints, just concerns and things like that. So, it's a start, and I think we should be okay from here on out. Though I'm not making any promises. Ginsburg may slip it in at one point. If you're still concerned about that, I was rereading a couple of the James Baldwin comments on Going to Meet the Man, and you be sure you definitely watch my video on the N-word and on James Baldwin's Going to Meet the Man to kind of better understand stuff. Your midterm is coming up, and so you really need to be watching these videos because there could be information in these videos that are included on your midterm that you may not pick up otherwise, and certainly it's a quick way to study. Also, as we move along, we've got, this week we have the Ginsburg poems. Next week we have the Annie Dillard essays. Then we move into Streetcar Named Desire for a week, and then pretty quickly we go into the novel, which will take a few weeks, Bluebeard by Kurt Vonnegut. If you've not purchased the novel yet, you need to do so. I'm not sure if there's any available in the campus bookstore. A lot of times, if they're not purchased within the first couple of weeks of the semester, they'll send them back, but it's something you ought to be able to buy online and get to your pretty quickly. There's probably not a whole lot of copies around town at Barnes and Noble and places like that, because it's not Slaughterhouse-Five or one of his huge bestsellers. So go ahead and purchase that. I don't want, that's going to be a huge portion of your final exam, and so you definitely need to read that. So let's move into Flannery O'Connor. And I'm going to go ahead and do both short stories as one here, which may be a little confusing. We'll see. I'm winging this one a little more than normal because I've taught them so long, and they kind of work together more than any other short stories. I think there's a lot in common. Flannery O'Connor was born in 1925 and died in 1964. Now, she died so early because she had lupus, which at the time is an autoimmune disease, right? And at the time was fatal. And in fact, in one of the photos I showed of her earlier, she's in crutches. You can see at some point, which would, as the disease moved further. She was a Catholic riding in the South. And, that was a little bit of a rarity. We've got a lot of Catholics in the South now, but those are pretty much overwhelmingly Hispanic. Protestantism is more of the Southern religion. You have to go to sort of New England to see a very high percent, or New Orleans, to see a very high percentage of Catholics. Uh, Flannery O'Connor is from Georgia. Notice I started with Ray Charles's Georgia on my mind with these videos. She was born in Savannah, but grew up really in Milledgeville. She moved there in 1940, and that's where she ultimately died. She attended, and this is important, I think, with the story, the University of Iowa, specifically the Iowa's writer workshop. And this is a big thing. We don't think University of Iowa, hooray, but Iowa is actually known for being the best creative writing school in the country. A lot of great authors have come out of there. In fact, Kurt Vonnegut taught there. So we see a lot of that. Now, if you're interested, and I'm going to list here the books by Flannery O'Connor, if you're interested in other books by her, I list them here, and then you can actually go to the class website, Loibner-Waitkus.com, and under the shopping area, I've got all of her books available, and including a recent biography on her, and she's tough to find biographies on, so you may want to give that one a shot. She really only published 4, we'll say, well, actually 3 pieces during her lifetime. The 4th, of course, she wrote, but was published soon after she died. She wrote Wise Blood in 1952, which is a novel. And then A Good Man is Hard to Find in 1955. Now, you may have read A Good Man is Hard to Find in your Comp 2 class. That's very common reading. In fact, I teach it in Comp 2. That's the title story of that collection of short stories. Both of these short stories come from A Good Man is Hard to Find. In 1960, she wrote The Violent Bear It Away, which is another novel. And then, again, posthumously in 1965, Everything That Rises Must Converge was published. And then in 1971, all of her short stories were combined into one book to form her complete short stories. And so that's pretty much it. There's some other things, letters and some other writings that people have put together by her, but as far as fiction goes, that's where it ends. So let's start off about talking about Good Country People, which again published in 1955, which is the same as The Life You Saved May Be Your Own. Now, let's go through names, and these 2 short stories, names are really, really important. We start off with Miss Hopewell, right? Hopewell, she hopes sort of for the best, and we see that with her character. She's sort of tied into religion, and hopes for the best. Holga, on the other hand, is her daughter, who we know was named Joy, and she went out and had her name legally changed to the most horrible name she could come up with, and purposefully. Again, she's missing a leg from a war injury, so she has this prosthetic leg, and we know that, not only is she sort of chose this horrible name, but this wooden leg that most people who have prosthetics attempt to hide it. She walks around sort of slamming it, right? Then we have Miss Freeman, which again we see free man, who is a very interesting character. Again, when Miss Hopewell hired her and her husband to be tenant farmers on their land, the previous employer sort of said, oh yeah, Mr. Freeman's a great man, but Miss Freeman is in everybody's business, and she's why we couldn't stand them, and don't hire her. But Miss Hopewell has this plan that if she wants to be in everybody's business, she'll put her in charge of everybody's business, and basically put her in charge. So that is kind of her answer to solving that problem. We also have her 2 children who are only mentioned by name, Glennice and Caramay, whom Holga/Joy calls Glycerin and caramel, which again, glycerin meaning oily, and caramel meaning sticky sweet. So she's kind of making fun of their she's clearly making fun of their names there. And then of course we have the most phallic name in the history of literature, Manly Pointer, which we know is not his real name, but again, you can't get more, Manly Pointer. His name might as well be Penis, right? So there's that sort of aspect. Now the interesting thing here with Holga is she has a PhD in philosophy, and again her mother sort of sent her to college while a lot of women send went to college at the time, which was to get their, the joke being their MRS, right? Their Mrs. You go to college to find a college man. And, Holga does not do that. Holga goes to college to study philosophy, and gets her PhD, the most advanced degree you can get, in a doctorate in that subject area. And so she's become this sort of, nihilistic atheist. She doesn't believe there's anything beyond what there is, which is in contradiction to, of course, her mother, Miss Hopewell. Now, so you've got that. Now, along comes Manly Pointer, or whatever his name really is, who is a Bible salesman, and he comes along with this, idea of Bibles. Now, we know later, when we find out there are 2 Bibles in his valise, that there is, that Bible selling probably is not really what he's up to. He's some sort of grifter attempting to do whatever, and maybe it's just what he attempts to do with Holga. Holga, again, they have dinner. There's some discussion there. Miss Hopewell, again, always hoping well, refuses to, not have dinner with him. She invites him to dinner, and sort of they share this evening. And in the process, she finds that Holga is outside talking to him. Now, Holga lies. She's 31, 32, and says that she's 17, I believe. And so, because Manly Pointer claims he's 19. And so she is talking to him, and they arrange a picnic date for the next day. And so this date's really kind of interesting because you can see, again, the point here is, how smart Holga is. She's so much smarter than everyone else in her own mind, and we see her played like a real fool by Manly Pointer, right? He first off, he needs to, for his ultimate goal, he needs to get her into the barn, and he uses the most basic reverse psychology, right? He says, gee, I wish we could go into this barn, but we can't because of your leg. And of course he knows from Holga's personality that she's going to prove him wrong and climb up into that barn. And so he uses that to get her there because that's what he needs. Now she, we know, dreamed the night before about seducing him. Okay, she's going to seduce him, and is considering how she's going to do that, and thinking her ways through and the repercussions and all of that stuff. But pretty quickly it becomes clear that he is seducing her. And one of the things that he does there is, again, he's focusing on this idea of love, and this one trick that he plays that I really think is interesting, and I have a personal story that relates, but I'll save because I don't want to bore you with it, but of a similar situation with someone with a deformity, even though it was not as big as missing a leg. One of the things that he kind of does is gets to her heartstrings by wanting to see where it connects. It's part of her. It's part of what, if they're going to be together, if he's going to love her, he's going to love her stump. Now, there's an interesting thing too. He refers to, or O'Connor refers to the peacock blue of this stump, and we see the word peacock again used in The Life You Save May Be Your Own. And so this peacock thing is a O'Connor sort of obsession. And in fact, most of her books, and I'll show some more images of some stamps and some other drawings and things, we see her a lot with this peacock. She's very associated with this peacock thing. It was a little bit of an obsession. But he gets her up there, and he convinces her, to take off this prosthetic leg. Now, before he does that, what's interesting is, because they're kissing, he removes the glasses. And this is a little bit of a foreshadowing, because he slides them into his pocket. Now, we don't know where that's going yet, but later, in retrospect, we can see that as foreshadowing. And so he moves the leg sort of, away from her, and then makes the point, she thinks that she's so smart, he's the smart one here, and breaks out, all of these things, condoms, these alcohol, playing cards that are dirty. So we know that this Bible salesman is not so, in fact, one of the Bibles is fake, and contains alcohol and all of this other stuff. It's one of those false books that we see. And that people tend to hide things in. I have a safe in my office that's a fake dictionary. And so, I don't have anything dirty in it, but that's what he's sort of doing. And so, once he gets this leg from her, he takes it, and we know that he's got all of these other prosthetics in there too. So it's almost like he went through all of this. He came up with this fake heart condition that Joy has. He played Joy used his supposed naivete, right, to play Joy into the situation, and then she's sort of trapped up there without a leg, and again, which would make getting out of the barn very, very difficult, which we will come back to later. Now, what is O'Connor's point here? Is this an attack on atheism? Is this an attack on philosophy? Is this an attack on being overly educated? Well, we know that Flannery O'Connor was Catholic and Southern, from the South. We mentioned that earlier. But again, Miss Hopewell, who's religious, her religious dogma does not come off any better. In a way than Holga's. I mean, she's not ultimately punished for it, but we see that idea. So, the question is, and this would be a great essay topic: what is the role of religion here in this short story? The other thing too to consider is what we talked earlier about the difference between a fetish and a paraphilia. Again, Manly Pointer is into these prosthetics. Now, he never has sex with Holga. So the question here is this a fetish? Is he into these prosthetics, or do they just become sort of these odd trophies for him to show that he's tricked these women out of them? That's another interesting topic to look into. And I'm going to circle back in this next one because I want to talk a little bit about Fate's Worse Than Death, because O'Connor has this tendency to kill off her characters, and no one dies in either of the short stories you read, and I think that's pretty important. Now, let's move on to The Life You Saved May Be Your Own, and again, we're dealing with names here that are very transparently symbolic, right? You have Mr. Shiflett, whom we know is Shifty. Okay, and then Lucy Nell Crater, and they're both named Lucy Nell, both the daughter and the mother. Crater meaning empty, vacuous, nothing there. And so, Mr. Shiflett comes along. He's missing an arm. So again, we have another amputee. Again, what O'Connor's doing with this, we know with the leg to a little bit with Holga, she's kind of trying to show, that she's missing that part of her body and soul. There's this connection there. With Mr. Shiflett, he's missing this arm, but he comes along and says that he wants to do work for them. And we can see pretty quickly, his goal here ultimately is to score this automobile, to fix it up and get this automobile. And so he works with Lucy Nell, who's deaf. That's really important here, to convince her to or to teach her to speak some words, okay? And the mother, who keeps going on and on and on about how she could never leave her alone, and she's such an innocent girl and such a sweet girl, and she's so smart, she can cook and she can clean and all of these womanly tasks, which is, a little bit of irony and tongue-in-cheek, I think, on O'Connor's part. But what's interesting here is, she's pretty much trying to pimp out her daughter with the hope that Mr. Shiflett will stick around and they'll have a man in this family. And so what Mr. Shiflett does, of course, is repairs his car and, won't marry her because he does not have money. He needs, a good woman should be taken on a honeymoon. She should go out to a nice meal, that sort of thing. Now, what he does once they marry at the courthouse is he gets in the car with her and they drive. And the distance here is important. They drive 100 miles away. Now remember, his car is only going 30 miles an hour. 100 miles away at this time is, and notice he's heading towards Mobile, which again becomes symbolic, showing that he's mobile, that he doesn't stay in one place. But he goes, about 100 miles away, which is a long distance here. And during the meal, Lucy Nell falls asleep, and so he's the guy working in the restaurant says, oh, what a sweet little angel, and he said, oh, she's just some hitchhiker I've picked up and I've got to get rid of, and so he leaves her there asleep, and gets into the car, and along the way he sees this "Life You Save May Be Your Own" sign, and picks up a hitchhiker. And we think here, he's going to help this hitchhiker, and he starts talking about his sweet mama, and sort of trying to talk this hitchhiker out of that way of life. And the hitchhiker bails, rolls out into the ditch to get away from him. Now, the question here is why? I mean, does he just not want to hear this all mothers are great, BS that Mr. Shiflett's feeding him? What's going on here? When I read it initially, my father, and a lot of people, I mean, my father certainly didn't coin this phrase, but a lot of people have that saying, don't bullshit a bullshitter. Excuse my French, but you've heard that saying before, and I've always kind of read it as the hitchhiker pretty quickly picks up on, this is not a trustworthy man. While I may be a hitchhiker and someone who's probably, hitchhikers generally aren't up to any good. While he might not be up to any good, I think he's probably realized he's out of his league with Mr. Shiflett, and bails because of that. Now, what I want to circle back to, and I've skimmed over a whole lot of, and you can pull up stuff on the symbolism and moments of grace and the religious aspects of this and all of this. What really interests me about these stories, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of death in O'Connor, right? She loves to kill off her characters at the end. If you've read A Good Man Is Hard to Find, again, the entire family dies execution style at the very end of the story. What is different about these two is no one dies, but in a way their fate's worse than death. To Holga, her ultimate, everything that matters to her is just that she's so much smarter than everyone else, right? And that she's got everything figured out. And again, how is she going to explain that she's stuck in a barn missing a leg when someone comes along to find her, right? So she's going to be completely embarrassed because she was conned by someone she thought was stupid. And so, again, to her, I think that fate is almost worse than death. Lucy Nell, on the other hand, the deaf girl, is, I think, even worse here. You have to remember, this is 1955 in the South. It would be, she's 100 miles away from home. Again, the family is very poor. The mother is probably going to assume they got married. After they got married, they just sort of ran off. And so what's happened is he's left her in a diner. There's a very, in my opinion, there is a very slim chance that Lucy Nell will ever make it back home to her mother. And so this is at a point, that in the United States, when Americans, especially specifically in the South, American Sign Language is, she would speak to her mother probably through pigeon sign, okay? That's the term that we use when we don't have a formal version of sign language, where we just sort of use different symbols and we create our own. It's very common in communities that don't have a standardized form of sign language. And so, again, you've got this, deaf girl who can only sort of say bird, oddly, and is not going to be able to communicate with anybody. And so, if I were teaching this in a regular class, we would play the whole what's going to happen to her game and wait a while, and then finally people would realize, she's going to probably be institutionalized. She's going to be put in an insane asylum in the South in 1955, which we can assume is a fate far, far worse than death. So, Flannery O'Connor loves to sort of do this. And again, we see, if you read A Good Man Is Hard to Find in your Comp 2 class or in high school, you see this idea, are there any sympathetic characters in any of this? That's one of the things O'Connor loved to do, is write about horrible people and have horrible things happen to horrible people. And that's what we see in the story. So, essay topics, again, you could discuss go through some other works. What is Flannery O'Connor doing with names? What is Flannery O'Connor what are her thoughts on religion here? Because, again, she's very, very critical of Holga the atheist, but at the same time, she's very, very critical of Miss Hopewell. Miss Freeman, we're sort of trained not to like from the very beginning. She's certainly not that much of a redeeming character, but there's something about her that makes her less odious in a way than the other people, almost because, what you see is what you get there. So, I don't know, but there's a lot of ways to go here, and I've discovered over the years students really, really like these Flannery O'Connor short stories, and so, I would advise you, do some Googling and see what some other people have had to say, and see if you can come up with some ideas of your own. So, I will see you with next week. You have Hal. Just read it. I'll do my best to make it make sense. It's a pretty difficult piece, and I'll see you then. Have a good one.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. I said, Georgia, Georgia, a song of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pines. Other arms reach out to me, other eyes smile tenderly. Still in the peaceful dreams I see, the road leads back to you. I said, Georgia, oh, Georgia, no peace I find, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. Other arms reach out to me, other eyes smile tenderly. Still in peaceful dreams I see, the road leads back to you. Whoa, Georgia, Georgia, no peace I find, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my I said just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind.